Ready? All right, this meeting of the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding will come to order. And Sean, if you will call the roll.
Delegate Keem.
Present.
Delegate Askew. Delegate Hodges.
Here.
Delegate Ranson.
Present.
Senator Kiggins. Senator Locke. Andrea McClellan.
Present.
Chris Stern.
Present.
Joseph Bouchard. Vice Chair Converse Fowler.
Present.
Senator Lewis.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was that correct? Oh, we do actually. If in case we do decide to vote on something later, we do have a quorum. All right. So we've got a couple of presentations today. We squeezed this in prior to the session which starts on Wednesday, so that we could also talk about some potential legislation, and that's farther down there at the end on the agenda. But we do have a couple of presentations. We're going to shift it up a little bit, and if Daryl, if you don't mind going first to update us on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the grants, and then we'll do Matt for the Coastal Master Plan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me back. Give you a brief update on where we are with the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. As you know, Governor Northam announced the latest round of awards, which is the second round of awards, back on December 22nd. So far, we've had 2 rounds completed. The first round closed on September 14th. There were 32 applications received. Second round closed on November 5th. There were 39 applications received. The third round has started. It started last week, and it will run through April the 8th. Loans, given all of the discussion about the future of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and its revenue sources, loans are being postponed until round 4 of the grant, if in fact we are able to go forward. Of the 4 Reggie auctions that have occurred, the first one back in March of 21, it was $19.5 million. The first round of awards in October was 19 awards for $7.8 million. The June auction was $20.3 million received. And the round of grants that were just announced on December 22nd was for $24.5 million for 30 awards. Plus, there will be an additional supplemental award to the Middle Peninsula PDC for $180,000 due to some confusion between round 1 resubmittals and round 2 new submittals. But that's been resolved, and so they will get this subsequent supplemental reward. Roughly 25% of the applications awarded so far have been to what I'll call non-urban localities. I have a list if you'd like me to go through it. The third auction in September was for $23.7 million, and the fourth auction, which closed on December the 1st, was for $38.4 million. So that's $101.4 million that has come into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, of which between those funds that have already been awarded and the $40 million in grants that are available in round 3 that runs through April the 8th, is a total of $72 million to date. The last time you invited me here, you asked some questions about administrative expenses, and I'd just like to give you a little bit more detail about that. The Coastal Resilience Master Plan contract was just under $3 million, and I'd like to thank Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, who has departed for Washington. Greatly appreciate all of the work that she did, along with Matt Dallin, who will be presenting the related Coastal Master Plan database following me this morning. With the Admiral's departure, Matt and his team have moved over completely to DCR and are now working with the rest of our floodplain team. Web hosting for that master plan database costs several $1,000s a month alone. We also are obligated to develop an outreach plan regarding both the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, but we are going to take that outreach statewide. So we have to develop an outreach plan over the next year, and we have to conduct outreach meetings all over the state, and that will go on for a couple of years. Per Section 10.1602 of the State Code of Virginia, DCR is required to develop a flood resilience planning statewide. Basically, what we're talking about are additional master plans. And the way that we are going to proceed with that is we are going to develop those based upon the major river basins in the state. There are 10 such basins, but given the size of the James River watershed, we will probably need to divide that up into 2 or 3 segments, which is often done for other types of analysis. So we may be talking about as many as 12 additional master plans that need to be done in order to complete all of that level of planning for the rest of Virginia. And again, the Coastal Resilience Master Plan that was just completed is Phase 1. Phase 2 will soon begin, was for just under $3 million, just to give you an idea what type of long-term costs we may be looking at. There are also 7 DCR floodplain staff that are completely funded through the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, including Mr. Dallin and his team. We have 4 of those positions filled, including 2 grant positions to help us manage these funds, and there are 3 more floodplain planners that are currently under recruitment. And DCR staff is beginning to work with localities outside of the coastal area. In fact, we are conducting training throughout this week in Southwest Virginia on both the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the National Flood Insurance Program, the dam safety regulations. And most of that training is going to be virtual this week, but then we will be making a trip in person to Abington the last week of January to conduct some more in-person training with those who cannot participate virtually this week. So unless there are questions, sir, that's basically my update for you this morning.
Darrell, anyone have any questions for Darrell? Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being with us here this morning. In the first 2 rounds, what was the total amount that could be distributed, and then what was the dollar amount of what was distributed actually in those grants?
The first 2 rounds, and this is before administrative expenses that I just discussed, was for just shy of $40 million. And the amount distributed in the first 2 rounds, again, minus administrative expenses, was around $32 million.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what do you know approximately what the administrative expenses?
Sir?
Administrative expenses were?
I don't have that figure with me,
Okay.
but I can get that. I can get that for you.
It's not approaching $8 million. I would hope.
No, it's not. But
That's the difference.
It's not. But the Coastal Resilience Master Plan alone was just shy of $3 million.
Okay.
That's part of your expenses. You can't, that's part of
Yes,
your expenses.
I'm counting those
Okay.
as part of our expenses.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I've heard from, especially after the storm last week, I've heard from citizens all across the Middle Peninsula of the issues that they're being faced. There were roughly 40 applicants across the Middle Peninsula that had applied for funding in round 1 and in round 2, a total of about 40, but yet not one of those actually was approved by DCR. I was wondering if you could possibly address that.
Yes, sir. That area has received some grants, primarily for capacity building, the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission in particular, and also for some planning that they're doing. The issue with the applications out of the Middle Peninsula, at least the ones that were submitted by the PDC, is, as I mentioned in your last meeting, is that they were mostly submitted as either individual properties or as 2 adjacent members. The code specifically says that we are to prioritize projects and applications for community scale. And as we have explained to the PDC what they needed to do, and we gave them a second opportunity to resubmit their round 1 applications in order to do so, which they did not, was to look at additional properties nearby the properties that they submitted in order to increase those projects to an actual community scale. So therefore, they graded lower than the other applications that were funded.
Mm-hmm. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, that's not actually the way I read the actual code itself. But when you look at actually watershed areas where you have property owners, even though they're not adjacent, and they're in the same watershed, wouldn't they qualify at that point?
It's not that they don't qualify, it's that because other properties surrounding those properties or bordering those properties were not included, those individual homes are not of community scale. They were scored, but they're going to score lower than those projects that are of community scale each and every time, because that is our preference as dictated by the code.
So, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, in looking at this, with the thousands of miles, I mean, I represent, over 1,000 miles of shoreline in my district. To have community scale in a rural area is going to be basically almost impossible. So what you're doing here is you are eliminating a large portion of the state and help for these private citizens by doing that and addressing it in the way that you are currently. And you're discriminating against the rural areas and shifting the dollars to the urban areas.
Delegate, as I mentioned, over 25% of the applications that have been funded have been through non-urban areas, such as Buchanan County, the Northern Neck PDC, Town of Colonial Beach, Middlesex County apparently had its own project, Northampton County, Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission. There are a number of them who did follow the guidance and follow the manual and adhere to the code and submitted projects of community scale, and they were awarded funding.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, were those dollars for planning and so forth, or were they for actual projects for the most part?
I don't have each individual project committed to memory, but I can get you that information.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, one follow-up question. It appears that some awards were given that resulted in DCR giving more funding to applicants than what was requested. Is that something you're aware of?
We have had a few instances where the project required an amendment to the budget, and we requested an amendment to the budget upon reviewing the scope. We also did that for the Middle Peninsula PDC, and we got revisions from them and increased some of their funding.
Because, in looking, we have localities where the amount requested was 4.1 million, and they actually received 4.9 million. So was that through, how did that actually occur?
When reviewing the scope of a project, if it looks like something was missed or something just simply didn't add up, we have given every applicant the opportunity to resubmit their budgets for their proposals.
Okay, and one follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. Understand in round one and round two that even though all costs are eligible, your staff is actually disallowing salary and overhead from some of the applicants, but allowing it in others. How does this actually occur? Is it true, and how does this actually occur? And why would that occur?
Staffing is covered by a capacity building grant. Capacity building is not allowable for existing staff. Where new staff have been proposed, that's adding capacity, and that is an eligible activity that has been funded, but not supplanting existing funds for existing staff.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll save any comments to the end.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hodge. Anybody else have any
Mr.
questions?
Chair.
Yes, sir. Councilwoman McClellan.
Yes, I appreciate the overview. I guess my big question is there's obviously from Delegate Hodges' questions, there's concern about the oversight and how these decisions are made. Can you just clarify again, what is the process for making these, scoring these applications? Is that through you and your staff? Is there an outside body?
It's multi-layered. Our floodplain team reviews the applications. They give a preliminary score and project summaries, which are provided to me and the DCR Director, Clyde Chrisman. We review those. We ask whatever questions we may have, and then we meet with the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources to get her concurrence, and then all three of us sign off on that, and then it goes up to the governor's office, and the governor has actually announced the awards.
And Darryl, you said 25% have gone to non-urban areas, 25% of the grants?
25% of the approved applications.
Applications.
I can't commit that to dollars. I haven't done that
Sure,
math.
sure,
but-
yeah, sure, I understand, okay. And how much money is left in the fund? You know,
Am I allowed to count administrative expenses or not?
yeah, go ahead and count it, I just,
Okay.
in gross, what's in there?
Not including the additional master plans that will need to be done for each river basin, which we feel will basically use up the remainder of the fund.
Okay,
There's approximately $23 million left once expenses for staff and the ongoing expenses for the web hosting, et cetera. Additional work to the Phase 1 Coastal Resilience Master Plan that has already been discussed. But I want to emphasize that to do this level of planning, such as the Coastal Resilience Master Plan across the state, is going to take a considerable amount of money.
right,
And if the source of funding for the fund goes away, which is a topic of discussion elsewhere, then we will need all of the remaining funds to complete the master planning across the state.
okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Converse Fowler, is that you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work. I know the implementing is tricky, and I just appreciate everything being done. Is there any suggestions for this committee or any proposed proposals or anything that we can be doing to improve the program or improve anything that we've touched upon in the last few minutes in this presentation?
Well, in terms of administration of the fund, I think it would be very helpful if it was explicit that the department has the authorization to take administrative expenses from the fund, because this question keeps coming up. The other suggestion I would make that would be certainly a lot easier on our staff would be is if we could make 2 offerings rather than 4, because we're barely finishing up with one before we're starting another, and we have other responsibilities such as the master planning, such as administering the National Flood Insurance Program. I would just harken back to what happened, the tragedy that happened in Hurley a few months ago. The same staff is working on all of these things. And so if we could have a little bit of time between rounds of grant offerings, that would be extremely helpful.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, Mr. Councilwoman McClellan.
So you're speaking to the question that I have, as in the code, as I understand it, DEQ is authorized to take 3% of the fund for administrative costs, but there's nothing authorizing DCR to provide for administrative costs. You're just using that.
Well, what it says, it says for studies of regional or statewide significance, but it's a little vague.
In those plans, you think how much they're going to cost, the watershed plans? You said that you're going to do 12, is that correct? 11 to 12?
Yeah,
on
by the
Face
time
of
we
River
split the
Basin?
James River watershed up, it's probably going to be a dozen additional master plans.
And, if the funding for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund does go away, the staff that you're hiring right now to administer it, would they still be, are you still going to staff those folks?
We would have to submit a budget amendment and request to shift their funding to another source of funding.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no other questions, we'll move on. All right, thank you
All
very
right.
much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Matt Dalen, you're up with the Coastal Master Plan presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Lewis and members of the subcommittee. Let me share my screen. Let's see if this. Can you all hear me?
Yes, good.
Okay. And can you see the screen?
Yep.
All right, great. Well, it's an honor to speak with you all today and update you on the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Today, I'd like to specifically focus on the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer. This past December, Governor Northam released Phase 1 of the Master Plan. That release of the Master Plan document was accompanied with the release of the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan website within the Department of Conservation and Recreation. That's what I'm currently sharing on the screen right now, as well as a new contact email, flood.resilience@dcr.virginia.gov, for additional contact information and outreach. This website contains 6 main components that are outlined here in the buttons in the middle of the page. We have the master plan document itself, the master planning framework information that was done in October of 2020. We have the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer, so people can visualize the results of the work that we've done. We have the Technical Advisory Committee work. It was very instrumental to have them support and guide us through this process. And so we've documented the information from those meetings, as well as some other materials from there in this page. We have an open data portal, which is using to share the data so that people can create their own maps should they wish. And we're working to add more data to that. And then lastly, we have an outreach and engagement button where past meetings are documented and people can see what was discussed there, as well as future meetings coming up. So today, click on the Web Explorer button, and this brings us to our Web Explorer on a new page. There's 6 tabs at the top. I'm trying to spend about 2 to 3 minutes per tab. If you need me to slow down or have any questions, please let me know. And then we're also DCR is hosting a 1-hour lunch and learn session this Thursday, January 14th from noon to 1 p.m. So a 1-hour session to give a little bit more in-depth explanation of the Web Explorer for the general public. And if people are interested in attending that lunch and learn session, they can register on the DCR Dam Safety and Floodplain Management website under the calendar. So getting into the Web Explorer, just an overview, 6 buttons, and we'll kind of progress through this, or 6 tabs. An introduction tab that provides an overview of the Explorer and the master plan. The hazards tab, so where is the flood hazard, what's the exposure? Then we get into the impacts, what's the result of that flood hazard exposure, who's it interacting with, people, structures, natural resources. Look at the community context, so where there's flood hazard exposure with people, what is the makeup of those people? And we'll get into projects and initiatives and then funding opportunities. So first, go ahead and click into the hazards button and let it load up. And a lot of these, especially the first 3 buttons or tabs, have a similar layout, and just wanted to give an overview of the layout. In the map section here on the right side of the page, when you open it up, the legend shows you what is on the page, and we'll get into this legend in a few minutes. You have the option to do aerial imagery or change your different background types that are available. We'll leave it on the light gray to help us go through this. You can also go full screen. I'm not going to click this at this time. Again, the legend that you can see what's being displayed on the map, as well as layers where you can turn off and on different layers. We'll get into that in a few minutes as well. On the left side, this left column, you have the ability to select an area of interest. And this is broken down at the Commonwealth scale, Virginia. The PDCs or regional commissions, so the 8 different PDCs and regional commissions, you can get results just for those areas, or at the locality scale as well. Below the area of interest, you can select your time horizon. We were guided to do coastal flood hazard risk and impacts for the time periods of 2020, 2040, 2060, and 2080. We've also extended that out to year 2100 to assist the CRS communities use that data to get additional points to help lower their flood insurance premium costs by moving them to the next grouping should they choose. And then you have data below that corresponds to the area of interest across the time and the hazard we're at. And then at the bottom of each tab, there is some notes and limitations just to provide more awareness and information on the information that the viewer is using and what it's applicable for and what limitations it may have. So here in the hazard side, this is a graduated flood hazard layer, which means for a selected time period, you are seeing the flood hazard exposure across 9 flood scenarios. And that goes from mean low water, mean high water, 2-year, 5-year, 10, 25, 50, 100-year, and 50-year annual exceedance probabilities. This is a continuous and consistent layer across the state, which helps us provide consistency in planning and evaluating, and that we can all use this data as a common basis. Not to mean that the impacts are the same or the water level exposure is the same, but that the same methodology was used across the state to provide the coastal flood hazard. And it's a high resolution data set that when you zoom in, it's down to a 10-foot raster grid resolution. So very detailed, that's using available digital elevation models that we have to develop this data. And so you can click over time and see the flood hazard increase over time and where its exposure. And if you click on a certain location, you can see how that hazard exposure changes over time. So in this location in Matthews County, there's no exposure in 2020, 2040, but then in 2060, you're in the 500-year floodplain, and by 2080, you're in the 50-year floodplain. And you can do this any location across the map so individuals can see how their risk is projected to change over time. I do want to note that this is the coastal flood hazard only, which is a product of tidal and storm surge flooding that includes relative sea level rise using the NOAA intermediate high projection. It does not include fluvial or riverine flooding or pluvial or overland or stormwater flooding in the model. And that's an important note and something that came up during our outreach sessions is that we acknowledge we're not representing the total flood hazard, but more the coastal flood hazard at this time with phase 1 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. It's an important distinction here, waiting for the FEMA flood hazard area map to show up as well. Sometimes this FEMA layer is a little tricky. We're sourcing it from them. But I can describe that here in Fredericksburg, where the coastal flood risk is relatively narrow, the existing riverine flood risk that FEMA currently maps is beyond our coastal flood risk. So just again, making a point that there it is, it's finally loaded. We aren't modeling the total flood risk right now and are focused on the coastal flood risk, but we are working to include riverine flood risk as well as the stormwater overland flow rain-driven flooding, which FEMA doesn't include on those maps, to try to help localities have a total picture of what their total flood hazard is in the future. I'm going to move on over to the impacts. So now we know where coastal flooding is. We can look at what are the impacts of coastal flooding. Again, with the legend coming up, this impact, it's a very high to very low scale. So it's a relative impact, and it's relative to the scale or area of interest that you select. So right now, it is a composite impact type for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The impact type we can choose, and there's 3 different groups of impacts. Community resources, top one on the left, which is people, places, buildings, residential structures, critical sectors. So any building or structures that fall within the critical sector category, which are really systems and assets that are vital to the state, regional, and national activities. And then we have impacts on natural infrastructure as well, which focuses on more environmental impacts, tidal wetlands, beaches and dunes, upland, wooded uplands as well, to figure out where this flood hazard impacts are. We've gotten some good data from here. So when you select an impact type, you can see that across the Commonwealth of Virginia, currently, or in 2020, approximately 360,000 people are exposed across all event types. But out to 2080, that number increases to around 950,000. And you can select an area of interest. So let's go over to the Eastern Shore and see what the impacts are. Currently, 10,000 population exposure, increasing to 15,000. Again, you can down select even more and just focus on Accomack County. And again, your relative impacts are changing. So your hotspots that are lighting up are relative to your area of interest, which is important for local planning, because at the state scale, the hotspots really light up in Hampton Roads, but that may not be as important for the Eastern Shore or for Accomack County. So relative to their jurisdictional boundaries or their region, you can see where the relative impacts are and see the numbers. There's been some pretty staggering numbers that came out of the study. When we look at all of the buildings exposed to all of the flood events, the average annualized flood damage, so if these events were averaged out over time, how much damage financially could you expect to these buildings to be averaged over time? In 2020, it's around $600,000. By 2060, that's $2.8 billion per year. And out at 2080, it increases to $5.7 billion of average annualized cost. So there's a great deal of risk here that we're presented with, and really are working to build resilience to try to reduce that risk. And as we do that, moving over to community context, need to consider where is this flooding happening? What kind of communities is it impacting? So when we look at our community context data, this is population data from the American Community Survey of 2018, waiting for updated census data for 2020 to update this information. But we have overall social vulnerability for the project area, which was the 8 coastal PDCs, with the American Community Survey data, with population based on where the residential structures are. So you notice a big gap in the Great Dismal Swamp, no residences, no population there. And so we can see where our social vulnerable places are in the reference data. We've combined that reference data with the flood hazard exposure data to find and visualize what does that look like. Where do you have high flood hazard exposure and high social vulnerability? These red areas, these hotspots that are communities that start to light up, and you can see that again over time. This is when we look over time for all of this, we're assuming no change in population, demographics, or buildings. The only thing that's really changing over time is our water level. And if we take no action, these are the areas that are would be impacted over time. And this information was helpful for guiding our underserved community meetings, outreach meetings that we did this past year. We conducted 12 of those meetings. We have capacity to do more of those meetings moving forward and look to continue with our outreach efforts. So now we kind of know the context of the community, where the flood hazard is. We know how that hazard changes over time and the impacts. The next button, which is a critical button for this, is what are we doing about it? And so we have projects and initiatives. A project is something that you're doing in the physical or built environment. So whether it's a development or adding protection, adding green or natural and nature-based features to reduce flood impacts, or conservation and removing something from the built environment. Those are captured in projects, where our capacity building, planning, studies, and other work are captured in our initiatives. So on the left, we again have the area of interest where we can down select from all of our projects and initiatives. The categories, whether it's a resilience project or capacity building initiatives. What hazard is it addressing? Again, we modeled the coastal flood hazard, but we know there are other flood hazards that exist: riverine flooding, stormwater flooding, groundwater flooding, coastal erosion, that aren't captured right now in the hazards, but we receive projects for localities, and really have to thank the localities and the PDCs that were able to participate and help populate our project and initiatives database. This was done in a relatively short period of time over the summer, and we were able to get 517 projects and initiatives in our database. And so if we focus on the resilience projects, they're the areas in green. We can look at projects that are addressing coastal flooding, which is about half, a little bit more than half. And then what type of a project is it? We can see if it's a natural and nature-based project. Is it a structural project, or is it a combination of the two, and that being a hybrid project? So we can select projects or filter projects and see how many we have it, again, by location or by category type, what it's trying to solve and what type of project. And you can select a project and it'll zoom into the project footprint. These footprints were drawn or identified by the project owners. And so again, you can look at the footprint, turn on some aerial imagery, and then you also can add additional mapped layers. So you can see how it interacts with the floodplain now in 2020 versus 2080. You can look at the community resource impacts. They're set at larger scale, so you got to kind of zoom out there. Same with critical sector over time, natural infrastructure, or that combined social vulnerability and the coastal hazard. And when you select a project, the project information shows up in this middle row here. So you get a general description of the project and its name, what it's doing, the coastal hazards it's addressing, estimated implementation costs, and where it's at. This one's currently under construction. The next item down, which is an important part of building resilience in the state, is really funding resilience. And so once we develop a project and have a plan, got to find money to pay for it to implement it. And this funding source row takes our funding information from the funding database, which will be our next tab. It searches through it based on the project criteria. So what type of a project, where is it at, to down select a number of potentially available funding sources. So here we have 9 available funding sources for this project. While it's already under construction, it just helps neighboring communities look at this and can see, okay, that's what they're doing. We can talk to them to see where they actually got their money, as well as look at these potential funding sources for the future so we can help develop our own projects. So that is the project database tab. The last tab is our funding opportunities, which is our funding database. Right now, there's 96 funding opportunities that are listed here, and you can search through funding source, funding type, its purpose, eligible applicants, kind of cost match, sharing, the maximum funding. There's a lot of information that people can search through to identify how to fund these resilience projects to help build a more resilient Virginia. All of this data that's in the hazards tab, so data that's used to produce these numbers on hazards impacts, we're working to make that available on this web application so people can download this Excel sheet filter through it and have that own data available for them. We're also working on getting these layers available through the Open Map portal so that people can create their own maps should they choose to help facilitate their planning and building resilience plans. And that's another thing, working to improve and enhance the project database. It's really a great start. We've done a lot of work from March to December in 1 year for this whole region, but there's more work to be done to improve and enhance this database and this web application. And we're currently working to get that started and really build the engagement from the communities, make this a useful tool that they can use that helps facilitate their planning objectives, and that the state can then learn and see what the localities can do to assist them through that process, coordinate across regions, and sort through projects for potential funding sources as it comes up. So that is an overview of our Web Explorer at this time. Again, thank you very much for allowing me to walk you all through this. And there is going to be a longer hour-long session on Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. and that registration is available on the DCR website.
Thanks, Matt. That's great stuff. I've got one question, and then we'll see if anybody else has any. I know Darrell was talking about the need for outreach across the Commonwealth. You say you all are working on being able to take the web application statewide. How long do you think it'll take before that you can accomplish that?
The web application is set up that, as let's say for the hazards, if we wanted to add riverine hazards within the coastal zone or out in Southwest Virginia, we have the capabilities to do it. It's a matter of doing that work and those master planning efforts to build it out statewide. So it has the capabilities. It will take as much time as it does to get the master plans done for the entire state.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Matt?
Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman McClellan.
First of all, Matt, this is really impressive. So kudos to your staff for doing this so quickly. Also want to give a shout out to the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission because I know we provided a lot of data there. But speaking of, on the projects tab, what is the methodology or what do you have in place to make sure that those are updated regularly? How does that, because this is a snapshot. And
it is.
How is that going to happen?
Thank you, Councilman McClellan. It's a great question. You're right. This is a snapshot of where we are right now. And so really is the document, the phase 1 document that comes out. While we're looking to update that document, have a phase 2, and then eventually a redo of the entire Coastal Resilience Master Plan, this web application and project and funding database is a living document that we can continue to add and update to over time. We have plans to give project owners the ability to add, edit, and maintain the data that they're providing over time. So right now, we did a survey, collected all that information, and populated the database. We're working to make it more interactive, have some additional functionality where you could, as a project owner, see what your projects are, what information is in there, access it, and update it, and have that then update the database in real time so that it can be more reflective of not just where we are December of 2021, but where we are when you view this database.
That's great. Mr. Chair, one other question.
Councilwoman?
So the funding tab, which I also thought was wonderful, I noticed you could sort by types, and for example, you had federal. I'm curious how many of those are state of Virginia funding options?
I am not aware at this time. It's a great question, but I would have to look through and search and sort to figure that out. And you can sort it by funding type. Most of these are federal projects. We do have some state opportunities with the flood fund, with VCAP, but it's primarily federal funding sources at this time. but I can look and see what the exact number is and get that back. And again, we want to make this funding database downloadable so that people could download it on their computer and do their own filtering and manipulation. It would only be a snapshot at that time, but it would give them some more usability to work with the data.
Thank you. Yeah, I asked the question, it's certainly a leading question, which suggests that there's very little state funding for these flooding projects, and it's desperately needed. So I'm looking forward to playing around with the entire website. Again, kudos.
Anyone else have any questions for Matt? Matt, how long did it take you all to put this web app together?
Months, but very frantic months. And I'd have to give a shout out to our contractor, Dewberry, who did this work for us.
Yeah, that's great
And
stuff.
so without their ability, yeah, it's a lot. I mean, March 17th, we entered under contract and the master plan was released December 7th. And this was, it was a fast paced project, but it really is impressive what we were able to get done in that short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we let him go, a last call for questions. All right, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda, we have member business. Does anybody have anything to take up with the committee before we bat around some legislative ideas? Anybody? Delegate Hodges.
We can, just from the previous presentation from DCR, and I double-checked this and made sure. What was said earlier was that the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission did not resubmit. Those applications were resubmitted and actually did exactly what DCR had asked them to do, but yet not one project was funded. There's still roughly $8 million from those first two rounds. And as far as I know, Mr. Chairman, there's no minimum score. So why these projects in rural coastal Virginia were not funded is still baffling to me as why those weren't actually funding. So I think we need to take a hard look at the funding and how the decisions are actually made by the bureaucrats. Oftentimes, things get caught up in bureaucracy, and we need to take a hard look moving forward before making any decisions. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like to bring that up.
All right. Anybody else? All right, let's talk about some legislative ideas. I had hoped, and what we've tried to do in the past typically is we have some final form pieces of legislation for the committee to consider. And oftentimes we've actually voted on whether to recommend it or not. But I just don't, we were not able, and I don't feel comfortable asking people to, recommend or adopt or endorse anything in concept. Having done that in the past myself and having been bitten, I would prefer everybody to have a nice hard copy of something that they're actually going to endorse. But we can at least talk about some of the ideas that we have that we're going to be putting forward on Wednesday when we file at 10:45, whatever the filing deadline is, or that may already be filed. So does anybody have anything they want to bring to I've got a few, but does anybody else have anything they want to bring to the attention of the committee?
I always get the look. I just have one. I'm not sure. I'll probably have quite a few bills this year. But one I'd like to bring up. We had discussed at one of the commission meetings last year, I believe, the possibility of creating a clearinghouse for, very similar to the BMP clearinghouse for new technologies. That fit between a hardened structure and a living shoreline, and most of them actually lean towards being a living shoreline. Of course, that came back, and there will be a fiscal impact. Everyone says, hey, this really needs to be done, but the reality of it, it's going to be very difficult to get that moving. One thing I am looking at is adding, low-crested armoring to the definition of living shorelines. In addition to, the stone and, other technologies that contribute to habitat. So adding that, we've tossed that around quite a bit with a number of folks, and I think we have a definition that folks can actually work with.
So are you definitely putting those in, or?
I'm going to put that in.
Okay, okay. All right, be on the lookout for that then. Anybody else? Mark? Margaret? Anybody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. At the last meeting in November, I was just trying to look back at the notes. I don't think we had a chance to really have a conversation, but Mr. Stone, among others, had raised the issue, I know, last year as well as this year, about the need to add some more conditions and definitions on resiliency in the context of both transportation and other sea level issues. And so Mr. Stone had suggested 3 different amendments, and I just, just to make sure that we had the opportunity to have this discussion, I went ahead and drafted that. I think just looking at the text, there might be a little bit of tweaking that's still involved, but one would be a bill that would add the resiliency definition to the smart scale conversation. The other one would be combining the tidewater as part of the plans and then adding the resiliency language in that. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but as both a member of this committee as well as somebody that has been working with Mr. Stone and others, I wanted to make sure we had that to be presented if there's a desire. So I'm happy to introduce the bills, and whether it's a work product of this committee or not, I certainly hope that committee members here would look favorably upon that issue, because that's something that we discussed. Maybe Mr. Stone might have other additional comments on that.
Chris, you want to say anything?
No, I've looked at the legislation that Delegate Keem has put together, and I think it does a lot to move the football down the field a little bit in terms of getting resiliency, not only in smart scale, but also in the comprehensive plans. I think the website that DCR has done, I think is going to be extremely helpful to the PDCs in the planning process, but there's a whole lot more that we can do to, prepare the Commonwealth for what's coming. So I appreciate him putting these in.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Do you mind, can you share them with the legislators, or, well, everybody on the panel?
Sure, happy to do it. I just need to make sure it's the final version as we had it.
Okay. I will say, Chris, and Mark too, I had a bill last year that introduced resiliency into the smart scale scoring process, and you're going to run into some headwinds on that. Yeah, but I mean, I still think, I think it's the right direction to go in. I'm just saying it's not as easy a lift as it may appear common sense wise, but anyway. Delegate Hodges.
I do have another one thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have another one that I just thought about. One of the issues we have is when contractors have a particular project and going from locality to locality, consistency in how the Chesapeake Bay Act primarily and other programs are actually implemented, or the Chesapeake Bay program is implemented. Of course, some localities may be more over-regulatory than others, so the contractors really don't know what they're going into. So this basically would require localities to report to DEQ what they actually do, and those, it's actually already defined in regulation, the minimum criteria that have to be met. And they would actually report to DEQ, then DEQ would actually publish on its website what each locality is actually doing. So it would allow for some consistency for contractors primarily and property owners to know exactly what these localities are doing and what is actually required.
So I've got a few that I'm kicking around, well, not kicking around, they're going to be introduced in one form or fashion, and I think they're pretty much where they're going to be, or they certainly with the time constraints we have, they better be. We're going to have a bill in that's going to clarify the Chief Resilience Officer's duties. Also is going to, from a housekeeping standpoint, it is currently housed in the Public Safety Code section, so we're going to move it over to the Secretary of Natural Resources section where it is supposed to be. We're going to codify the Resilience Master Plan requirement that we keep and maintain a master plan, and the Technical Advisory Committee that goes along with it. Right now, of course, that's all been done by executive order. There's going to be one or more proposals. I think I'm not sure the administration may have some competing proposals on this. We've got a bill that's going to create a resilience revolving loan fund. That's going to be introduced. I think Delegate Bloxham may actually have that on the House side. I'm not sure about that. And then I want to put a bill in that's going to really require localities to start, when they do their comp plans, to start taking in and considering resiliency as part of the comp plan update process. So most of those, that's pretty straightforward, and that one I think is in its final form, but some of them still have some tweaking that needs to be done. But in any event, there are things that I'm going, and I'll be glad to, when we get them in final format or where I think they're close to final format, be glad to share them with the members of the committee. I apologize for not being able to get some of this stuff out to you beforehand, but it's been rather hectic, as it has been for all of us. So any discussion on anything that we've talked about with those potential legislative issues?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman McClellan.
So obviously, I'm not a legislator, but I have been working with a variety of folks from the PDC and the environmental community, and Delegate Hayes is putting in a bill for the creation of a Commonwealth Flood Board that would be under SNHR and a flood department. The Flood Board would have oversight over the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and perhaps future flooding sources as well. So we're really excited about that, and has the unanimous support of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission.
Okay. Yeah, and that brings me to another point I had forgotten. I have going to be preparing as a matter of fact, I think I got it back this morning, that actually gives the oversight for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund over to the Soil and Water Conservation Board, which is a little bit less of a heavier lift and doesn't require creation of different departments and probably won't require much budget, if any, budget additions. It expands the state board, State Soil and Water Conservation Board as well. So I think that modified that from the original iteration, which was, as Councilwoman McClellan just mentioned, Commonwealth Flood Board. So there's some of the ideas that we have kicking around. Again, anybody else have anything that they want to add to the mix or comment on in regards to legislative initiatives? Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we have the resolution, I think you and I are both carrying, to continue with the commission as well. And I believe that has been amended to include the intent for statewide flooding as well. I think the older resolution didn't include that.
That's
so
correct, yeah.
it will continue. It will continue with statewide flooding.
Mr. Chair, I have a question about the,
Councilwoman McClellan.
yes, sir, the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund that Delegate Bloxham is going to introduce. Will that accommodate funding from the Storm Act through FEMA? There's a concern about, is that the vehicle?
My reading of it is that it would, but I certainly need to make sure of that. Yeah.
That's great. I'm really happy to hear that.
Anybody else? Okay, Sean, do we have anybody signed up for public comment or testimony?
Mr. Chair, there are currently 15 people waiting in the Zoom room to provide public comment, and there may be some here in person as well.
Okay, can we check and make sure they actually want to provide comment or that they have inadvertently wandered into the Zoom room?
At this time, I'd like to remind everyone signed up as an attendee in the Zoom room that you are in the public comment queue and you will be called upon to provide testimony to the Joint Subcommittee. If you do not wish to provide testimony, please leave the Zoom room at this time. And you can find a link to the live stream to continue watching the Joint Subcommittee proceedings if you wish.
Okay. Scurrying for the door, are they? Okay, well, let's go through them.
At this time, we're going to begin our virtual public comment testimony. Once I call your name, I'm going to promote you to a panelist in Zoom. You're welcome to, at that time, please begin your testimony. Ali Abbasi will go first. Christine Fulton will be next. Ali Abbasi seems to have stepped away from their computer. Christine Fulton will go first. Elizabeth Andrews will be next.
Oh, that's fine.
Ms. Fulton, please unmute yourself and begin your public testimony.
you. I'm glad to speak with you today. I want to comment about the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund and the importance of getting this money that could flow from the Storm Act to the to the Commonwealth of Virginia. If this is not passed in this session, it will take a full year until there's a possibility to get to those Storm Act funds. So I strongly encourage everyone on the committee to support a state revolving loan fund. I work with Resilient Enterprise Solutions. We received funding from the Commonwealth of Virginia to develop and deliver the Home Raising Academy, which we have successfully done in the Hampton Roads area for several classes, and we are starting one, in fact, tomorrow. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Andrews seems to have stepped away. Emily Steinhilber, please unmute yourself and begin your testimony. Erin Riley, you will be next.
No Emily? Okay.
Sorry, technical difficulties. I have no testimony today. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you all.
Grace Tucker, you'll be next, followed by Paul Robinson. Grace Tucker has left the room. Paul Robinson, please unmute yourself and begin your public testimony.
Thank you. I have no testimony. I'll continue as an attendee. Thank you.
Christine Fulton, oh, pardon me. Mr.
Thank you. I already
Yes,
spoke.
Thank you, Ms. Fulton. Mr. Chair, at this time, I do not believe there's anyone else who wishes to provide public testimony virtually.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Is there anybody here in the audience that wants to say anything to the committee? No? All right, guys. Anybody else before we gavel out have anything they want to add? Chris?
Mr. Chair, this is just a thought in hearing the people testify. I know last year there was a piece of legislation that required the Commissioner of Highways to include resiliency in transportation projects.
That was mine, yeah.
And I know that in VDOT, the Structures and Bridge Division has some provisions to account for climate change. But I don't know that there's any other division within VDOT that's done that. And I think at some point in time, it would be helpful to know, what steps have been taken, in some of those other areas. Yeah. Location and design, for example, I don't think that they have anything. Okay. And I think that some follow-up action would be appropriate.
All right, good point. Good point, Chris. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, following up on that excellent point by Mr. Stone, is there an opportunity for a JLARC study to be commissioned that would take into account and study where all of the funding is going for all types of resilience throughout the Commonwealth? Certainly there's a lot of money coming into a lot of different places, and I don't know that we have a handle on what that looks like.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent idea. I will tell you, as we all know here, JLARC is oversubscribed. And so, I mean, if we get one in, it's going to be possibly a few years, I think. Is anybody here on JLARC? Are you on JLARC, Margaret?
No. Mr. Chairman, it may be a quick question over to the Secretary of Transportation, just to see if it's something they consider in an environmental impact study when they have construction projects. just to see, if we could ask that question, how do they consider this? And
But I think
what suggestions
I think
do
what
they have?
Councilwoman McClellan's talking about, though, is sort of an audit about all the efforts and money that's coming into the whole thing. I think Chris Stone's point was what you said, just ask VDOT, hey, what are you guys doing? So, which I'd be more than happy to do.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I may, actually, by letter, was that last year? I had requested VDOT to basically look into this. I think the study and how they were looking at it wasn't exactly what I had asked them. I haven't seen that yet, but I can share with the commission once we get that back.
Okay. But you have not seen anything from them yet?
I haven't seen it as of yet.
Okay. All right. All right, that's some stuff we can follow up on during the session. All right, with that, we are adjourned.